Okay, well, good afternoon and good evening, actually, from New Zealand, and a very, very warm welcome to the third in a Thought Leader series that UNITAR have very kindly put together in these very interesting and challenging times. My name's James McCulloch. I'm the CEO of Inspire Group Asia. I'm speaking to you from Wellington, New Zealand, where our head office is, but in fact we have an office in Bangsar South, Kuala Lumpur as well. We've been in KL for a couple of years now. We also have offices in Australia. So speaking personally, what an interesting and challenging few months it's been as we've had to adapt in terms of what we do, in terms of e-learning and leadership development, working with clients all across Southeast Asia and New Zealand and Australia. And as I was saying on a call earlier today to my team, if you're feeling a little bit tired and you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, you're not alone. We've come to this sort of midpoint in 2020. We've ticked over into part two a couple of days ago, and for my part, I'm an optimist, and I hope that part two is perhaps a little bit brighter. It's certainly going to have just as much challenge and fluidity as we've seen in part one of 2020, and let's explore that on this session, because we do have an opportunity, don't we, to reimagine and reinvent how we look at work, how we look at leadership, how we look at governance, how we look at culture, and indeed how we look at the balance that we have in our lives as well. And all of us have faced, wherever we are in the world, Malaysia, Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, some degree of lockdown and restriction in the last few months, when we've had to adapt around that. I think there's a lovely quote as well about the fact that we're not working from home, we are at home in a crisis trying to get work done. Or another way of looking at it is we've been living at work rather than working at home. So again, for those joining us on this session who've had to balance work and home and children and family and community and health, there's a lot that we need to learn now. There's also a lot that we may have seen in the last few months that we'd like to hold very close as well, in terms of what this new normal looks like. So enough from me for the time being, or you'll be hearing from me every now and then. I'm joined by a really interesting and very experienced set of panelists here to offer some different perspectives from that world of work and people and culture and governance. So in a moment, I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, and as they do that, to share perhaps for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes a little bit about their experience to date, who they are, what they do, but also a little bit about, I suppose, their experience of 2020 so far. And it seems like it's been a long year already for all of us. So first of all, I'd actually like to turn to Claudia, because I have you in my line of sight there. So I'd love you to introduce yourself to share just a little bit about what you do, and also what's on your mind about this year so far. Thank you.
Thanks so much, James. Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me well? Okay, excellent. So let me very briefly introduce myself. My name is Claudia Cadena, and I am the founder and principal consultant of Threat Advisory. We are an organization that provides support to businesses around the challenges that they face on people management. So a little bit about myself. I've been in Malaysia for over 28 years, working in HR all this while. So I thought that the best way of introducing myself was to perhaps tell people my experiences in living in crisis situations. So I came to the country in 1996. By 1997, we experienced the first financial crisis in my lifetime, the first one that I experienced. And it was severe in Malaysia. I was a junior executive, and I was fortunate enough that I didn't lose my job, but I saw a lot of my colleagues losing their jobs. That obviously brought a lot of issues and a lot of situations that we need to deal with, including a little bit of how do you manage the relationship with the fact that you are a foreigner and some of the local friends are losing their jobs. So that was perhaps my first experience as a young executive in managing a crisis, and how do I as an individual do that. Fast forward 10 years later, 2008, I was obviously in the mid of my career working in some of the GLCs and working as well with the government's investment fund. And at that time, again, the 2009 crisis comes, and I was privileged enough to be able to participate in some of the efforts introduced by the government to work around that. So the GLC transformation activities, the creation of Talent Corp to attract Malaysian and foreign talent into the country. So different initiatives and efforts to deal with crisis. And fast forward another 10 years, here we are today dealing with this pandemic, dealing with this situation. Now I'm a senior individual with wealth of experience and on my own, having my own practice. So this year has brought up, in the last 6 months, two things from my perspective. First of all, a personal impact on my business, because obviously, as all of us, we saw our businesses being impacted by the situation, but at the same time having the great fortune of being able to support organizations that are going through this pandemic around how to manage their people, how to manage their operations, and how to make sure that they continue providing value. So that in a little nutshell is who I am and what I've done for the last 25 years that I've been here in the country. And in terms of managing this situation, I look forward to sharing my experience with the audience and listening to your questions, James.
Claudia, thank you so much. And I'd like to now just turn the attention over to our other esteemed panelist, Dato, but he's not asked me to call him Dato. I'm going to call him Dr. Vaseehar. So, Dr. Vaseehar, great to have you on this session. Great privilege to be here with you, at least virtually. I look forward to meeting for real one day. Please, the floor is yours. Introduce yourself. What do you do? What have you done? How do you see the world at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you, James, for your kind words. I will go a little bit further than Claudia. I have seen one other downturn in my working experience, actually. I started as a merchant banker in the 80s, and around 85, 86, Malaysia went through a recession. And Daim Zainuddin was brought in as the finance minister, and he did some very good cost-cutting measures and budgetary reforms to bring Malaysia back to a booming period of 90s. From early 90s to until 97, we had a 7-8 year fantastic boom. And then comes the 97-98 crisis. And during this period, I had already left merchant banking, and I was the CEO of a Saudi conglomerate having investments in Malaysia. And at the same time, this conglomerate used to own banks in Malaysia. So I was a board member. I had already become a board member and CEO during this period. And 97-98 was a total disaster for Malaysia. But thanks to the then Prime Minister and government, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, much to the chagrin of overseas World Bank and IMF, he went on his own methodology of how to put the economy back on track. And within a very short period, we bounced back into positive growth. And then came 2008 crisis, but because of the 97-98 crisis, we had learned a lot of what not to do, and therefore the 2008 did not hit Malaysia as much as the rest of the world. Primarily the Middle East, Europe and America were very badly hit. And then comes the 2020 COVID, which is look at it's almost every 10 years you have a kind of a crisis. And that's why the economists in their latest covers, they said be prepared for the next disaster, you know, and so we should be prepared. And of course this pandemic was totally unexpected, but it is not triggered by any economic issues, but it was caused by some virus which created havoc around the world, and therefore there is no country in the world that has been unaffected by this. We are all in the same boat. It is like you feel as if you are in the ocean. You don't know where you are going, and you are looking for a land. You are going without a compass, and hopefully you are looking for land, and then you can see some future of what is going to happen. So I will be not telling the truth if I tell you that I know the exact strategy of what we can do, but we are all in it together. The whole world is with us, and we are all struggling to the right methodology. And in the last 3-4 months, experience how get used to the new methods of working. I mean, this webinar itself is a great example of how we are catering to our new way of working together. And in that sense, I must congratulate UNITAR, which I understand has already embarked on online programs even before this COVID. So they are well prepared, like many others, like Amazon and some others who are benefiting from this situation now. So I will stop that just to say that I've seen 3 downturns, and this is a very unique one because how only people who have seen the world will be able to establish the current. It's also affected globally. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vaseehar. We get a slight bit of interference and breaking up slightly, so yeah, we'll give you a little rest.
Yeah. I saw some suddenly the screen went blank and then.
Yeah, but we got. I think we got 95% of it, and I think we got the good stuff. So we're absolutely fine. But we'll keep an eye on that connection, and we might just have to reconnect you to establish that. But let me turn back to Claudia, if I may. And yeah, I mean, am I remembering this right? Because you actually got some more material that you'd like to share. Is that correct as well? You can. Claudia, you want to share a few slides and a few perspectives before we get into the questions. Is that right?
What I will do is probably share those slides later on. I think that will be disruptive if I start sharing the slides, and the technology may just be too heavy, considering that the system is slightly unstable. So we shall share the slides later. I'm happy to do that.
Absolutely fine. And of course, the eagle-eyed amongst you might have noticed that you might have thought there was going to be 3 panelists and a moderator, and we're just waiting on Anne-Valerie to join us. We hope that she will. She was doing another event very similar to this earlier this afternoon, and I think just like in real life, if you can remember back that far when we were doing real workshops and real conferences, often the rich discussions would run on. Of course, it's the same in the virtual world as well. So, we'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully AB will be able to join us very, very soon as well. From my point of view, then, I mean, I suppose how I've seen the last few months is from a learning and development point of view. That is what we spend our time at Inspire Group Asia doing, helping organisations with leadership development and learning and development. And I suppose, what we saw probably around about February or March time is probably the biggest disruption and jolt that we'd seen in learning and development in a lifetime. I mean, if you think that so much of learning and development is delivered face to face through workshops or exchanges or conversations or coaching, and just like that, I mean, I remember there was a sort of 48-hour time period where so many things had to be cancelled and postponed, and of course now we've pivoted to doing things in this way, which I think is great. I think that, if I may, one observation I have is that, I personally miss the interactions that you have over coffee in the break, and the meeting with people and the networking and the mingling. And I think, we need to find some smart ways to bring that back as well. But undoubtedly, what I've seen to answer that sort of question about how the last 6 months have looked, I've seen a big shift, of course, to online learning and digital learning, without a doubt. I've also seen, you know, a great caring in terms of how people are looking out for their colleagues. Suddenly everyone is stuck at home trying to balance work and life and everything else. And I think, you know, some people have adapted very well to that. Some people have struggled with that enormously. And we've all been on countless Zoom calls and Teams calls. And as we know, there are colleagues who are quite good at contributing in those, and their colleagues are perhaps a little bit quieter. But I think we've all felt perhaps as well a little bit more productive because we're away from the distractions of the office. But my concern with that, and I might even pose this as the first question, and this is completely unscripted, it's just something that's occurred to me, is I do wonder whether we've confused productivity with progress. You know, so we've all become a little bit more productive as we shut ourselves away. But I suppose what we're not seeing so much is the collaborations that we used to see at a team level, at a board level, perhaps as well. So I'm very interested just to seek the panel's view on this balance between productivity and progress and innovation. And, you know, even if we could, you know, is it right that we keep locking ourselves away and working at home and avoiding that sort of social interaction? What are we missing? And you know, what does the balance look like? If I can turn to Claudia first. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I will say that the reality is we need to look at both sides of the coin. This is not let's keep on working from home, because in the first place, some people cannot even do that. And I come from that particular experience. And I will basically talk about that experience for the past 4 months so that I can express what an organization I'm working with at the moment has gone through. While most of Malaysia was closed and while most of the people were staying at home, one of my clients is considered essential services, and they needed to continue working. Not everybody, but the frontliners. The frontliners needed to continue working. And it was a challenge because at the end of the day, the first thing that we must remember is that everybody is exposed. Everybody has the same risk. Whether you are a frontliner or not, you have the same risk of being able to be infected with the virus. So immediately organizations had to figure out how do they protect their frontliners to make sure that they continue contributing and performing and being safe. That generated a completely different way of thinking. You need to, as a leader in an organization, start saying, how do we make sure that people in the front line are comfortable doing their job and understand that the organization still cares for them and will protect them and will do everything that is necessary to ensure that their welfare is taken care of while the rest of us stay at home. So that was the first premise. We need to encourage people to show up for work and ensure that they understand that we care. So that was one element. At the same time, because a lot of the people need to stay home and are sometimes unable to do work, we need to start then thinking, how do we connect with our customers? How do we manage the collaboration and the interaction? And even realizing that certain jobs that may have not been critical before become frontliners, like IT and corporate communications in this case. So again, second realization, people who may have been seen as support function, like IT and corporate comms, suddenly become frontliners. If they don't step up to the plate, there will be consequences to the organization in moving forward. So I will say, in a nutshell, we cannot think about just staying back home and continue working from home, because that model will not work in the long run. I think there will be certain functions that can continue doing that, but we need to acknowledge that there are certain functions that must have the interaction. So what do we do to make sure that we reinvent the way we perform and collaborate and deliver without sacrificing safety, security, and the human interaction, which is basically something that we thrive on. James.
Completely essential, I think, as well. Thank you, Claudia. And Dr. Vaseehar, what do you make of this balance that we've now got to find? You know, how do we get the best of both worlds, I suppose?
Yes, I mean, as Claudia has summarized very beautifully, you know, we can't be relying on work from home as the new norm. And we need to be, of course, at the same time, because we have learned some new ways of doing things, and inadvertently or by sheer coincidence, we find, oh my God, yeah, during the COVID, we are able to do this much better staying at home rather than commuting back and forth from office. So certain elements of work can be done from home, and certain parts have definitely to be done in the office. So my guess is it will be a combination. It should be an effective combination of both working from home as well as working in office, combined in the most productive way for the benefit of the organization as well as for the benefit of the individual or teams who form the organization, because we are basically social animals. You know, we can't be working alone. We need to interact. We need to meet. We need to have chit chats and coffee and some gossips in the corridor, etc. That adds to the spice of our office life as well. So we need to sort of balance between the two. There are certain elements which is more effective working from home, and productivity can be better, and that means office space need not be as big as before. And there are certain things we still need to report back to office. Even many years ago, the audit firms used to have this kind of workforce where the young interns and audit trainees, they don't even have a desk in the office, because all they are required is to go to their clients' place. So audit firms over the years have sort of shrunk to their sizes of office space, because they've learned that it's a waste of space having these people. So they, from home, they straight go to client's place. So this could be something that we other could learn as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and without a doubt, isn't it interesting though that the technology has existed to enable this, well, for quite some time, and certainly for the last year or so, the technology has been amazing. It's just that it's always been there. We haven't really had to use it. I mean, if I think about our own organization, we've been using Microsoft Teams for at least a year, 18 months, but only really using a small amount of its capability. And of course, what we saw instantly when we had to connect our offices in Asia, Australia, and New Zealand seamlessly is it's capable of amazing things. And if I think about a session that we ran just last night for a team in Islamabad, we were co-hosting it between New Zealand, Kuala Lumpur, and the UK, and it was almost as good as being in the same room. And the other observation I've had, of course, is that if you look back about 200 years ago, we were all working at home. You know, that's what you did. This is and then of course the Industrial Revolution, and then of course the construct of the 8-hour working day, which only dated from Henry Ford doing that research about the maximum amount of time that a person could stand on the production line building Model T Fords. So that's where these things. So everything has come from a kind of a habit that's then stuck, and now we see organizations moving. And I want to ask you about this as well, moving to these hybrid models of perhaps saying we might go down to a 4-day working week. There's a couple of large organizations in New Zealand where I am now, Perpetual Guardian as one of them, who have said, actually, we can go down to 4 days as long as you hit all your targets and you do this. So I'd like to ask you both what you think about, what I would call an emerging hybrid model. I mean, how can that work? How does that work from an organizational point of view? What are some of the things that have to be right in order for a hybrid or a mixed model of office and home, but also perhaps completely different pattern for our working week? And this time I'll mix it up and I'll go to Dr. Vaseehar first.
Thank you, James. We must now take stock. This is a good time. The last 3 months gave us a lot of reflective space and to think what we have been doing right and what has gone wrong to create the whole havoc in the system. COVID could be one disruptor, but if you also look back, excessive consumerism and excessive consumption in the world has also created its own environmental disasters. And I sometimes feel whether this is the nature's way of putting a stop to our by shutting down the whole world for months, just like how we shut the factories annually for maintenance. Maybe our creator thought, let's shut the world for a few months, and you see the beneficial effects of that. The environment is much cleaner. You see a lot of species of animals which were not there appearing in the sea, looks cleaner, etc. Therefore, I would think that should now look at world grow at 5-6%. Should China grow at 10% per annum, and how long can it keep growing? Should India grow at 8-9%? What is the optimal that we need, all of us occupied, fruitfully, gainfully employed, to have a good economic value for the whole world? Because the higher productivity, as we all know, benefits only a small segment. The discrepancy in the wealth distribution is enormous. 1% of the population seems to be owning, I don't know, 20 or 25% of the wealth. These are the statistics that come to mind. So who are we working for? Why are we working so hard to keep the world growing so fast, so that we are depleting our resources and destroying the environment? This is the thought that comes to my mind.
And I think it's an incredibly poignant and valuable thought as well. Before I turn back to Claudia as well, I mean, I think one of the things that lockdown or MCO, I think, caused that time of reflection in terms of the things that are important to us as individuals as well. There we were spending more time with our families and our loved ones than we used to, because we're not at work and we're not traveling. And certainly from my point of view, I wasn't zipping back and forth between New Zealand and Malaysia at least once a month. And I think from a personal point of view, what I discovered is I actually quite like being at home. I quite like being amongst my loved ones and all of the things that I'd missed by not being around. And you're quite right, of course, that you then begin to challenge, well, what was it we were actually trying to achieve? We were trying to do more and work more, to consume more and purchase more and have more things. None of these things actually were making us as happy as we were when we were locked down together, just spending time with each other. And I think it's been a very interesting observation. And if I think about what I noticed here in New Zealand, and we went into full lockdown for 5 weeks, a complete silence outside, but with no cars, no traffic, clean air, no planes in the sky, and how wonderful that was to be able to just to explore our neighborhoods and to be out and about and seeing those things. So I think there is some great things that we need to take from it as well in terms of lessons. And of course, you're right. This is the moment, and the window is closing very, very quickly as well for us to have that change as well. What I find fascinating about it is the change will not come from business or governments or organizations. The change comes, as ever, from within. How we choose to be, what we choose to say that's important to us as individuals. So with that, let me turn to Claudia. I mean, how do you see this new hybrid balance emerging? I suppose it's going to depend so much on the individual, but what do you think?
Yeah. So, well, I'll bring a different perspective, and it's the perspective of reflection. I think what we need at this stage is to really sit back and question everything. So if I were to bring the corporate perspective and the thought process of figuring out whether the blended approach is the right approach or whether there is any other approach for that matter, I will say that there are very specific questions that organizations and individuals will need to start asking themselves. And I will just briefly describe them. I think the first thing that we all must ask ourselves is, what have we actually learned about our operations and our business under all these movement control conditions that have been imposed on us? Because every organization was forced to adapt, learn, and make changes immediately. So we talk about how change is difficult and how we resist change. But when change is imposed on us because it is a matter of survival, we all align, we all think through, and we all get it done, for better or for worse. So what's important is, let's look at this as a very great learning opportunity to evaluate our business, our operations, and our model. Now, of course, all these changes will force us to really revisit and review our business focus, our KPIs, and our SOPs. So we need to look at that and figure out, what do we do to respond more effectively to a crisis in the future. So let's not forget all the learnings and throw them into a basket, but let's make sure that we learn from all these and that we as business become much more ready and nimble and prepared to react in the case of either the second wave that surely seems to be coming up, or any other crisis that may come our way soon enough. Now, the third element really relates around our resources. And this is all about, can we do the same with less? Can we, and I'm not just talking about people, but can we do less without, more with less money, more with less time? So it's all around, how do we adequately use all the resources that we have to improve efficiencies? Because we saw that we had now less of everything, but we needed to deliver the same. So again, is how do we recondition the resources to be able to deliver effectively? Technology has become something that we cannot ignore anymore. So whoever said, I'll look at technology later, welcome to the now. Technology is not for later, it is for now.
Yeah.
I will say the other consideration will be, how do we implement physical distancing principles on an ongoing basis? Because until and unless there's no vaccine, we will need to figure out how do we do this to maintain our people safe. And the last consideration around determining whether a hybrid model works is, how do we make sure that we keep our employees engaged and ready to face the challenges at work and at home? Because as much as we enjoyed being at home, for some it was really challenging, and we hear how tough it was for some people with small kids. I mean, as you said, we were on total lockdown for about, I can't remember, maybe 7 or 8 weeks. And it was total lockdown, like impossible to go out more than one person per family to go and buy groceries. You have kids cooked in a house for 24 hours. You have parents having to deal with them and work. And that is not an easy situation. So you must make sure that somehow you engage your employees to keep them motivated and productive. So the blended approach works, but at the same time, it will bring different challenges. So I don't think it is as simple as just to say, let's put a blended approach. It has its pros and its cons, and we must ask the hard questions before we just decide that this is the right way forward.
Yeah. Absolutely right. And I think I want to talk a little bit in a moment about board leadership and board response to this, and ask you about that, Dr. Vaseehar, as well. But I'm what I've been fascinated about, and I've seen some examples of it here in New Zealand, of course, from our Prime Minister as well, is how you lead in this crisis as well, because what you've both just been describing, that will come down to great leadership as well. Empathy and understanding about people's different situations, about the people that are stuck at home, the people who have young children, the employees who'd like to stay working at home because they enjoy that space. But how do you accommodate everyone that wants to come in as well, and the people that miss, as you say, Dr. Vaseehar, there's the social connection as well. So, thinking about what you've both seen through different perspectives, I suppose, in the last few months, what do you think are the most important leadership characteristics that we now need as we come into this next sort of phase of dealing with this. So Claudia, if I turn to you first. Thank you.
Well, I must say that this is a real leadership challenge because it is about the leader being able to, first of all, act from example. So here you will have individuals who will need to demonstrate that they believe in what they say and they show that they are consistent in what they say and what they do, number one. And that is at every level, from the highest government official all the way to the cleaner. And I think if I look at Malaysia as an example, I am not Malaysian, but I feel so absolutely proud of the way our leaders and our entire citizen crowd have actually behaved. To see that leadership comes from everyone, from the cleaner to the prime minister. And what are the lessons on leadership that I can derive from the way we manage the pandemic to be applied into the companies? First of all, clear communication. So here we have the need to tell people what's going on, tell people the facts, tell people the good and the bad as the first step, so that everybody understands why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we locking down? Why are we asking you to wear a mask? Why are we asking you to stay home? Whatever it may be, and explain to people the reasons so that they can understand why they are in a way forced to do things, number one. Secondly, it's not just about you telling as a leader people what they need to do, but at the same time, you need to engage them back to understand how what we're going to do impact them as individuals and their ability to deliver. So we need to seek that feedback from employees, because from our leadership position, we may not understand all the context or the situations. So as we enable the open flow of communication, we'll be having greater understanding as to what can we do to enable our employees to perform. The third element that I consider very important is sharp focus. So we need to continue understanding, where do we want to end? What is the outcome that we want to achieve? Because then we can tell our employees, this is where we are all heading. And this is what we are doing this so that we can get there. And with empathy, with care, but at the same time, with clarity of thought, which means if you as an individual are not pulling your weight or are not delivering to what is expected, performance management has become one of the most important elements of being a good leader. You must have the tough conversations with people, and you must be able to tell them, if you do not row in the right direction, our boat is not going to be able to sail. We will sink. So I will say this, in my opinion and experience in seeing government leaders and organizational leaders deal with this pandemic, are the critical characteristics of anybody. And I would say lastly, recognition, because there are heroes in the whole process who have worked really hard and who need to be recognized for the efforts and the sacrifices that they have made.
I think that's a wonderful summary. And just before I turn to our other panelist, I think the analysis that's been done here in New Zealand, and obviously there's two or three quite unique things that have happened in New Zealand. First of all, let's just be quite clear, we're quite a small country in the middle of the South Pacific. We can effectively cut ourselves off from the rest of the world, but for the time being, and there's some questions about long-term sustainability around that as well. But we had a very interesting leadership response to this, because I think we had less than 100 cases in the country and we went into full lockdown. And the view of our Prime Minister was that if we don't do that, in about a week's time, we'll be in a sort of Italy level of crisis. And it was a very bold move. It was really asking 5 million people to change their behavior overnight. Now, if we think about what we try and do as leaders, we're often trying to influence and change behavior of organizations and teams and boards, and it's very hard, and we never quite manage to completely do it. So, in terms of what she managed to do, you're quite right, Claudia. I think clarity was one piece. This is what's happening. This is what you need to do about it. The second piece was making meaning. Actually, this is why we need to do it, and this is the reason for it. The third piece, and you're quite right. And the piece I think that she got so right was the empathy. This will be hard for you. I understand it will be hard for you, but I tell you what, if we don't do this, it'll be a lot harder for all of us forever. So let's all just dig in and suffer a bit of short-term pain for a long-term gain for all of us as well. And if I think about the most effective leaders that I've seen at an organizational level in the last few weeks, it's those that have blended, as you say, clarity with empathy and understanding everyone has a different part to play. Everyone has a different mindset, an emotion around, what they're able to do at home as well. I think the best leaders I've seen have understood some people cannot work to their full capacity because they're looking after young children. Those children can't go to childcare anymore. That's a problem. Those individuals won't be able to sit on Zoom and Teams calls all day. They'll have to do their work when the kids go off to bed. Therefore, they're probably working less hours, and that's absolutely fine. So I think it's the best leaders are doing that, and of course the best leaders are getting great results from their teams as a result of that as well. So, Dr. Vaseehar, what do you think about leadership? What have you seen? You've obviously seen some great leadership in Malaysia as well, but where do we go from here?
Yes, I would like to build on what you just said before I forget about your prime minister handling this whole situation. I mean, two cases before was the mosque firing and where some people were killed. Yeah. The manner in which she managed that situation and the manner in which she handled the COVID has made her a hero around the world for leadership, and she has also completely elevated women leadership also. So, I mean, women leadership now seen as very powerful during this global pandemic as well, because many women leaders have handled the situation much better than some of the narcissistic male leaders who I don't like to name. You all know who they are. I mean, and building on Claudia's situation about how Malaysia handled, we also were able to handle the situation quite admirably because the leadership understood the seriousness of the situation and allowed the civil servants and the health authorities to manage without political interference, which is always a great temptation for politicians to go and mess around with issues. In this instance, they completely left it. Of course, the politicians gave the vision and the strategy, but they allowed the health authorities and the professionals to handle it. And therefore, we were able to, and we had a very compliant society. Malaysians, as you know, culturally, we are very compliant compared to even Indonesians or Filipinos or some other ASEAN countries where the SOPs were not completely followed. In Malaysia, I was very impressed. 2 weeks ago, I was driving to Penang when the lockdown was lifted. And everywhere, including the R&R, the restaurants, the praying areas, people were completely observing the SOPs. And until now, we are still, even though we have liberated and opened up, people are still maintaining the social distancing, etc. So it is a combination of the people's mindset and the right leadership providing the guidance. In the corporate leadership, if I can give two examples, let's say we take a company A, which has been only interested in its own self, that means share buybacks, excessive CEO compensation, hiring and firing staffs at their own likes and dislikes, will have a problem in managing this kind of a pandemic situation, versus a company B, which has conservative management, has cash accumulated over the years, and then has an empathy for their workforce so that they have sufficient resources, both financial and human, to continue during this pandemic before they see how to agree to downsize or move on. So these are the companies which allow freedom to the people to maybe take a sabbatical or take a shorter working hours, work from home. They give these opportunities. Whereas companies which are only concerned about their share price and shareholders' values are the ones that suffer most in this kind of situation. So it's absolutely the empathy and how courageous the leaders are. It needs courage to say that I want to retain all my people during these troubled times. I don't want to fire. So can you imagine how the employees are going to be also loyal and dedicated when times change? And so we need to have courageous leaders who are able to sustain the organization. And this is where the management and the boards have to work together in a collaborative manner.
You're both absolutely so right in that, what we do now as leaders is remembered forever, the good and the bad things. And I think, it buys enormous goodwill from the team. Those organizations, and I've seen numerous organizations here in New Zealand who've, implemented, a 20% pay cut across everybody so that everyone can stay. We won't lose any staff. We'll all take a pay cut. We'll all take a tiny bit of pain rather than a small number of us feeling a huge amount of pain. And again, clear communication, compassion, empathy, all those things in play. We're going to take a short break now because UNITAR have got a small video to play about the MBA program, and it also gives myself and the panelists an opportunity to have a glass of water and to catch our breath for 5 minutes. So we'll come back in about 5 minutes or so to continue the discussion and to delve a little bit deeper. Because we only have the two panelists, we may also finish up a little bit earlier than planned, but we have just two or three more questions for our panelists in a few moments. So join us back in about 5 minutes time. Thank you.
Okay.
Equip yourself with the knowledge and leadership skills necessary in today's challenging corporate environments. Master skills and knowledge through immersive sessions with top industry leaders. Attend classes at your convenience and focus on subjects that interest you. Maximum flexibility to learn while you work. Master of Business Administration at UNITAR, a program that takes you further.
Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Just a short break there and a chance to learn a bit more about the UNITAR MBA program, which looks pretty cool, actually, I have to say. And as many of us are balancing working from home, I can tell you that in that short break, I was able to go and put a couple more logs on the fire. It's a cold, wintry night in New Zealand, so there we go. Making sure that when I come off this call, the house is nice and warm. My family are pretty happy with that. So I'd like to just to delve a little bit deeper, if I may, and starting with you, Dr. Vaseehar, around boards. We haven't really talked about boards and governance, and I think leaders. HR leaders, CEOs, the response they're taking, sets the tone, as we say, for how people remember them during this time. But of course, boards have a great deal to do with that as well. And I'm very interested to know, what you've seen and also, how boards have been responding, from your experience, and also what particular new skills and challenges do you think they have in the months ahead? Thank you.
I can hear myself also.
Yeah, the boards have to be, of course, we need to collaborate with this is the best time, sometimes in Malaysia, I have seen occasions where, especially in the government institutions, where the CEO and the chairman do not work very closely. We have had in the past a few situations where, because the chairman happens to be a political appointee, and then the CEO may be a professional, and there are some disruptions in the normal working between the two. And this I have observed as a coach, as a trainer, as a leadership development facilitator, as well as with my own personal experience on the board. Now, the COVID has brought about an understanding, because you see this as a threat across the board, everybody. So this has brought about a better understanding between the boards and the management, the top leadership, how to collaborate and work together, and where to draw the boundaries. The most important in the board's responsibility and the role is to know where is your boundary. We don't want the board members to interfere into the day-to-day management. At the same time, we don't want to give the CEO complete freedom that he can hang himself with the rope that you give to him, you know. And so it has to be properly, the boundaries have to be properly drawn. And many CEOs have destroyed, especially in the American and European context, through their own personal agenda or their ambition, or in terms of taking on mergers and acquisitions for their own benefit rather than the benefit of all the stakeholders. But fortunately, the boards in Malaysia are not that adventurous in their day-to-day dealings. The COVID-19 has brought about, I think, better understanding, because the situation really threatened everybody. So I could see a greater empathy from the board towards the senior management, and the senior management towards its employees, because except for those industries which has been completely disrupted, for example, the aviation and the hotel industries, we are still not thrown many people out of jobs yet, you know. This could be possibly, I'm just keeping my fingers crossed that it is not due to the moratorium of financing given by the banks for the 6 months. Therefore, everybody is holding on. And what will happen after the 6-month period is over? But we need to have a greater understanding to work together. And I think board members so far have sort of come up to the expectation and performed their role reasonably well, collaborating with the management. And of course, some of the older board members, I mean, that could include me as well, because once upon a time, I used to be the youngest board member in many boards. Today, I'm either the oldest or the second oldest in any of them. Boards, so times have changed, but so we need to equip ourselves also technologically, because many boards are now virtual board meetings. So if you do not know how to operate your Teams or your Zoom or your other thing and download your board papers, then you're in trouble. So we need to upgrade our own technological knowledge, as well as be well aware of how to collaborate with the CEOs and the team. The other thing I noticed is during this period, communications have improved tremendously, because you see, the hierarchy, Malaysia is a very hierarchical society, as you know very well. So, but that hierarchy has been completely broken down, because the CEO cannot be going through the hierarchy to solve his immediate urgent problems. So he goes direct to whoever he needs to communicate and get things moving or get things done. So this is one benefit of maybe for us to unlearn some of the things and make the organizations more flat rather than the typical hierarchical organization in Malaysia.
Well, I mean, let's hope so. But and it's something I've noticed personally, is that we're able to engage at a direct level, you know, at CEO level across Malaysia, because, you know, whether you're the CEO or the intern or whatever level in the organization, you're in the same position, the same boat as we described before. You're at home and you're either going to be on Zoom or on Teams. And you're actually, in most cases, probably pretty glad of a conversation. So, you know, you can have those connections. And I think it will be so fascinating to see which habits stick in terms of, as you say, the virtual board meeting, the fact that if I think about our own business, we're able to pitch work to Malaysian boards without having met in person and start working with them and transforming their leadership and their culture. And I wonder how much of that will stick. I mean, what do you think, Claudia? I mean, you know, you've been in Malaysia for a long time, so you've seen some changes there. Do you think some of these changes will stick, or do you think as soon as we can go back to a normal, you know, we'll be desperate to get back there for boards and for senior leaders?
Well, I guess that's the fear that, as I said at the beginning, you know, that we don't learn from our experiences and we go back to what we're comfortable with, which is the stack of papers downloaded and printed for us, which is comfortable, instead of remembering the learnings. I think if we think about boards and top management groups in organizations, they have a variety of roles that they need to play. And this pandemic, in a way, has democratized the way in which we interact with each other, in which we have to live our lives, and in the way we have to perform our jobs. So there were no secretaries, there were no assistants. We became our own secretary, assistant, driver, and everything else. So all the convenience disappeared. And that actually made us realize that there were economies of scale and efficiencies that came about. And in fact, while we were on lockdown, I participated in tenders. I participated in presenting proposals to organizations via video conferencing. So life did not stop. And life did not stop at CEO's level, top management level, and board level. So it's about what are we going to do to continue with this, to make sure that we understand that, hey, there were so many savings that we can achieve in moving forward if we continue with some of these trends into the future. And it's about all of us saying to ourselves, was this more efficient? Was this more time saving? Was the process better? And instead of going back to our normal, usual activities, how can we continue improving and making sure that this remains now sustainable into the future? So I truly believe that, as we said at the beginning, nobody will be able to dictate what we will do except ourselves. So as individuals, we'll have to take our own responsibility and ownership of making sure that this sticks, rather than going back to the normal selves and normal activities.
Absolutely. Now, I'm going to just make an invitation. If you're listening to this call and you want to pose any questions to either of our panelists or indeed to myself as a moderator, we may have one or two questions that have come through via the chat channel already. But please do push those through now, because we're going to open that up in just a couple of moments, and we have Ben on the call from UNITAR who will administer those and let us know if there's any questions there. Because I'd actually like to ask probably what will be my final question to both of our panelists, and I might even try and answer this myself if I'm allowed to do that as a moderator. I make the rules, so I am. And it really would be, you know, bringing everything together that we've talked about, and we've talked about leadership, we've talked about governance, we've talked about, you know, this hybrid model, we've talked about, you know, the worry that we might have about how things might slip back. I'm going to give you both one wish for the future, and that wish starts now in this second half of 2020 and beyond. And I suppose, putting aside the obvious tragedy of what we've faced around the globe, and this is a very serious situation, you know, what's your wish for the positive that comes out of this situation in terms of how we reinvent our future? I'm going to turn to Dr. Vaseehar first. Oh, and we just need to, you've been very good about putting yourself on mute, we just need to take you off.
If we go back to history, and we have always, humankind has always been able to overcome any kind of situation, and ultimately as a society we have won over the historical years. Thousands of years we have survived, every kind of crisis, situation, etc. And as leaders, we are also merchants of hope. You should never give up hope, optimism. And we should inculcate that in our society, as well as if you are board members or CEOs, you need to keep them motivated, keep them. Of course, I'm not saying being an optimist means to tell lies, like how your prime minister handled the situation. The difficult part has to be taken care of, but at the same time, we must give confidence to the population that we can together overcome. So that is the message that we need to pass across, that we shouldn't give up hope, that yes, this pandemic is there and it's created havoc which we never expected. There are some benefits from there, and a lot of losses are there. For example, you see, to see the severity of the pandemic, the world economy is going to shrink by 5.2% GDP this year, and the developed worlds will be hit by 7%, and the emerging economies will be hit by -2.5 versus -7. So an average of 5% shrinking in the GDP. And it is going to push, and this has never been seen in the history until 60 years ago when there was the Great Depression and the wars. And this is going to push a huge number of the people in the world to a poverty, below the poverty as well. So there is a lot of challenge for us. I'm not underestimating the challenges ahead, but we still should work with optimism and hope and recreate. I mean, there are the young people. My greatest hope is on the young people. From biblical times to Quranic times, it is the youth who have always stood behind the leaders to bring about change. Whether it was Moses or Muhammad, it was the young people who stood with them. And I think the young people of today, with their technological advancement and advantage, they will be the new people who will bring about change in the society and our way of working. That is why I have great hope in the youth of the world as well as the youth of Malaysia to bring about a rebirth of the nation and bring it back to whatever the normal, the new normal or normal, but they will get adjusted to it, I think. Yeah.
Oh, that's a lovely notion, and I think, one of hope, one of optimism, and also great energy that comes through from that generation as well. Claudia, what about you? What's your hope?
My hope revolves around collaboration. I think we know that this pandemic is going to bring tremendous amount of negative impact in every phase of society, in many organizations. So we need to rebuild, and the only way of rebuilding is in working together and in collaborating. We understand, and these last 3 months have shown us that when there is a need for change and there is clarity as to what needs to be changed, we all align and we all do what's needed to make sure that that change happens. So this was a great example of how change can actually happen in a very short period of time. And I cannot say that for the whole world. I can only say that for the example that Malaysia has given in this pandemic, and New Zealand as well. So we ourselves as a society have seen how if we collaborate, if we communicate, if we work together, if we forget about who we are and where we are from and what political affiliation do we have, but if we understand why we're doing this, we can get it done. So if we put the banner of collaboration over everything else to make sure that we protect industries, that we protect jobs, and that we protect livelihoods, but at the same time we hold people accountable for doing what they need to do to help the business and help the government, then I think we'll get out of this. But it takes all of us, and it takes all of us knowing what we're good at, what we can contribute, and to give it unconditionally. I think I sometime back, I put a posting in LinkedIn talking about how I couldn't believe that giving the news to an employee of not going to receive your salary increment for 2020 was going to be good news. I mean, 1 year ago, if you say to somebody that they're not going to get a salary increment, the next thing you know is they have the resignation letter on top of your desk. But today, when you tell them you're not getting a salary increment, they go almost, they virtually hug you because they cannot hug you, but they virtually hug you because they're so happy that they still have their jobs.
Sure. Yeah.
So the reality has changed, and that's when we all need to understand that it is difficult times, it is unprecedented realities, and we all just have to pull together in the same direction so that we can get out of this. And we can. That's the good news.
Oh, without a doubt. And if I can just add to what both of you have said, I mean, I agree completely. I suppose my hope would be around kindness. You know, we've seen some great examples of kindness and compassion, and I think in both of what you've said as well, that's shone through. So a kindness, a compassion, an understanding, a new level of tolerance, and if that means that we don't, consume as much, and if we don't, if some of the measures of success are different to what we thought in the past, that would be a great legacy from this, rather challenging situation. And speaking of kindness, I've been informed by UNITAR that there's no questions pending at the moment. So the kindness I'm going to offer now to our panelists, to myself, and indeed to everyone on the call, is I'm going to give you 15 minutes of your life back, because we're going to actually wrap up in a moment. And it has nothing to do with the fact that it's very late in New Zealand and I want my dinner, but it is very convenient. It is 9:15 in New Zealand, at least. I'd like to say a huge thank you to Claudia and to Dr. Vaseehar for some amazing sharing. I think, we had to adapt, of course, and we're all adapting because we were less one panel member who unfortunately had some technical issues and couldn't join us at the last moment. I'm sure she'll be on a future Thought Leaders series very soon with UNITAR. But I've really enjoyed the discussion. I've really enjoyed the sharing. Of course, in easier times when I'm back in Malaysia, I look forward to meeting you both for real as well. Thank you so much, and thank you to UNITAR for the hosting and pulling this together. If you do have questions and if you do have observations, of course, contact UNITAR. We're all on LinkedIn as well. You've seen our profiles in the promotions for this event, so please do feel free to connect with us and message us in that way. But for now, from me as moderator, thank you to our panelists, thank you to UNITAR. Have a safe and very happy weekend ahead, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, James.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.